Good morning, everyone. Chodesh Tov and Chanukah Sameach. Okay, we are now in Perek Gimel, the third chapter of Mishna Ma'aser Sheni. Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah 1. It's a quick Mishnah, so we're going to do two Mishnahs this morning. A person should not say to his friend, Ha'al es ha'peres ha'elu Yerushalayim l'chalik. Bring up these fruits of Ma'aser Sheni to Yerushalayim to divide. Meaning you need to bring up these Ma'aser Sheni produce to Yerushalayim. So you say to someone, bring these fruits up and we'll divide them. That you can't say, because that implies that you are paying him for bringing the Ma'aser Sheni up to Yerushalayim with Ma'aser Sheni fruits, and you can't do that. You cannot pay up your obligations, your monetary obligations, with Ma'aser Sheni produce. When you tell him, bring it up and we'll divide this produce, that implies you're paying him. That's you're giving him half, you're dividing up the Ma'aser Sheni produce with him for bringing it up. Rather you say to him like this, Halem, bring them up, so that we will eat them and drink them in Yerushalayim. That means I'm inviting you. If all he says is, bring them up and we'll eat them together, then that doesn't imply I'm paying you for bringing them up, but rather bring them up and come eat with me. That's an invitation. That's not a payment for your obligation. And therefore that you may say, as we find in a previous Mishnah that stated, but you can give one another a free gift. A free gift in that context meant inviting him for a meal. And therefore, if you just say to him, bring it up and we'll eat and we'll drink together, that's just an invitation, and therefore that is permissible. Okay, that's Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Beis. Ein leichin truma b'kesed Ma'aser Sheni. We may not purchase truma with Ma'aser Sheni money. You have a Kohen, and the Kohen wants to buy truma with this Ma'aser Sheni money. He had Ma'aser Sheni produce. He redeemed it on. He transferred the kedusha, the sanctity, onto money. Now he brought the money to Yerushalayim to spend as he's supposed to. He, as a Kohen, wants to buy truma. The Mishnah says, no, you can't do that. Because by doing so, you minimize those who can eat it. If you buy truma, then the only one who can eat it is you, the Kohen. Or whoever else is deciding to buy this truma. But whatever it is, if you're using the Ma'aser Sheni money to buy truma, you clearly are limiting those who can partake of it. Because number one, only a Kohen can eat it, not other Kohen, not non-Kohanim. Number two, if it becomes Tameh, if it becomes Tameh, if someone becomes Tameh, like if the Kohen becomes Tameh, he can't eat the truma. Now, the truth is that anybody who becomes Tameh can't eat Ma'aser Sheni either. But there's a big difference. A Kohen has to wait. If a Kohen becomes Tameh, becomes impure, he has to go to the mikveh to purify himself, and he cannot eat the truma until nightfall. Ma'aser Sheni is different. Ma'aser Sheni, if somebody is Tameh, they have to go to the mikveh, and once they go to the mikveh, they can eat the Ma'aser Sheni. They don't have to wait for the nighttime. Even though for other things they may have to, like for eating a carbon, but not for eating Ma'aser Sheni. So it really comes out as like this. When you use money for Ma'aser Sheni, anybody can eat it. Even if they become Tameh, it'll take less time for them to become tar to eat it. If you use it for truma, then it comes out, number one, you're limiting the people who can eat it. And even a Kohen who eats it, if he becomes Tameh, he's got to wait longer than for regular Ma'aser Sheni to go ahead and eat it. And the problem with all this limiting that we're doing can create a situation where it won't be eaten up, it'll go to waste. The more people eating the Ma'aser Sheni, the more chance of it being used up and not going to waste. The less people eating from it, or the less chances that you have to eat from it, that now creates a greater possibility of it not being eaten and of going to waste, and therefore that is why we say you cannot use the Ma'aser Sheni money to buy truma. Rabbi Shimon Matir, that the first opinion says you can't. Now the Mishnah cites Rabbi Shimon's opinion that says you could use it for truma. Rabbi Shimon holds that although you are now creating greater possibilities of, you're limiting who can eat it and creating a greater possibility of it getting ruined. According to Reb Shimon, if I indirectly cause something sanctified to be ruined, to go to waste, that I don't have to be concerned about. To go in and take Meiser Sheni and directly waste it, throw it away or waste it, that I'm not allowed to do it. Everybody agrees to that. But if what I'm doing is I'm buying Truma, per se, there's nothing wrong. That's not wasting. The problem is that by spending on Truma, by buying Truma, I'm limiting those who will be eating it. That's an indirect form. What I'm doing right now is essentially fine. It's food, it's Truma, it's going to be eaten. The problem is what's going to happen because it's limited, perhaps that's going to cause that's going to get lost. Shimon says that you don't have to be concerned about. Tanakama says you do. Dealing with Meiser Sheni, dealing with a sanctified object, you don't want to cause it to get lost. Shimon said to get ruined, or to be wasted, rather. According to Shimon, if I am not directly wasting it, it's not a problem. If what I do now, which is okay, could possibly cause it to go to waste. Amar Reb Shimon. So now Reb Shimon turned to them, meaning to the sages who represent the first opinion, and he wanted to make an argument for himself. Ma'im heikel b'zivchei shlamim. We find that we are lenient, meaning we allow Ma'aser Sheni to be spent on a carbon shlamim, on a peace offering. As a matter of fact, we learned that's the best way to use the Ma'aser Sheni money, is to buy a carbon shlamim from it. And when now when you buy a carbon shlamim, shumevia lidei pigo v'naiser v'tamei. By now buying an animal to be a carbon shlamim, you actually now bring it to the possibility of becoming invalid and unable to be eaten because of three laws called Pigo, Noiser, and Tamei. What are these three laws? These three laws are the following. Pigo refers to an offering whose service was done with intent for it to be eaten or for its sacrificial portions to be burned after the deadline given by the Torah. The Torah gives us a deadline for a carbon shlamim. You have 2 days and a night to eat it. Now, there's something called Pigo, which means if while you are doing the service, meaning, let's say you're slaughtering the animal for the carbon shlamim, but you have in mind it's going to be eaten, or the parts of it that are meant to be offered on the altar will be offered after the appropriate time for doing so, that thought invalidates the whole carbon. That's what Pigo means. Nosar, which literally means leftover, is meat of an offering that remains uneaten beyond the time given by the Torah. The Torah says a shlamim is 2 days and a night. After that period of time, it's nosar, it's left over. You're not allowed to leave it over, and if you do leave it over, you're not allowed to eat it. Tamei is meat of an offering that contracts tumah. It becomes kind of a source of impurity, became impure. Any offering that becomes pigal nicer or tamei is disqualified and forbidden to be eaten. So when you spend meiser sheni money on an animal for carbon shlamim, you are creating the possibility of it going to waste. Because if it's a regular animal, pigal nicer and tamei are not issues, only because it's a carbon. Nonetheless, we say that it's okay to spend money on a carbon shlamim. Loi neko but shuma? Will we not be, therefore, if you're already being mako, even with the possibilities of disqualification, buy a carbon shlamim, you say, I can buy a carbon shlamim. Shuma doesn't have any of these problems besides for tamei. But pigo naisar, that's not a problem. Doesn't exist by truma. So you have more chances of disqualification by a carbon shlamim, which you say is the best way to spend meiser sheni money on. You have more possibilities there of becoming disqualified and going to waste than by truma. So why shouldn't we be able to spend it on truma? Amrulai. So what they responded to him was, Ma im shlamim. No, that which we find, this leniency or the allowance to be able to buy a carbon shlamim, even though there are the possibilities of it getting ruined, of it getting wasted, shehein mutarim lazarim, but they are permissible to non-kohanim. Neko b'truma she'asur lazarim, shall we be lenient by truma that is forbidden to non-kohanim? What that means is like this. The Chacham's response is, you're right. Possibilities of disqualification are greater. There are more chances for that by a shlamim than by truma, because by a shlamim you have the laws of pigul, nicer, and tamei, and by truma you don't have pigul and nicer. So yes, possibilities of disqualification by a carbon shlamim are greater or more than by truma. But say the Chachamim don't look at it at the possibilities of disqualification. Let's look at the here and now, right now. When you buy something, when you spend your Ma'aser Sheni money on Truma, it's automatically forbidden to non-Kohanim. You're immediately limiting the amount of people who can eat from it. Carbon shlamim is allowable even to non-Kohanim. So the Chachamim say you can't. The point you cannot make an argument and say, well, you see, it's not a problem causing it to get wasted because look, I can use the Ma'aser Sheni money on a carbon shlamim. By carbon shlamim, there are more possibilities of going to waste than there are by truma. So the Chachamim don't look at the possibilities, which are actually possibilities that are based on someone doing a sin, transgressing, disqualifying you with the improper thought, leaving it over. You don't look at the possibilities. Look at what's happening immediately. Immediately, what happens by using the Ma'aser Sheni for truma is you've limited those who can eat it. By a carbon shlamim, you haven't limited it like that, and therefore, it's okay to use the money for carbon shlamim, to use the Ma'aser Sheni for carbon shlamim, and not for truma, because right immediately upon using the Ma'aser Sheni money for truma, you're limited. By carbon shlamim, you're not limited. You want to start telling me, yes, but what about the possibilities of disqualification that can happen? Those are possibilities. Maybe they won't even happen. But over here, it does happen immediately. You spend the Ma'aser Sheni money on truma, you've limited those who can eat from it, and therefore you cannot use Ma'aser Sheni money for it. Now, for clarification, the Mishna says, Zivchei shlamim karbanas are permissible to non-Kohanim. It's important to point out that in every carbon, including the shlamim, there are parts that no one may eat because they have to be offered on the altar. There are parts, even of a shlamim, that only go to the Kohanim. Non-Kohanim cannot eat. But most of the meat of a carbon shlamim may be eaten by non-Kohanim. So you've still got a lot more people having the ability to eat a carbon shlamim than truma, because truma is only for Kohanim. Okay, so the Chavetz Chaim told us, we learned yesterday, and we are in the fourth chapter, and we're now up to paragraph 2. So the first halach and the first law that we learned yesterday was that even if you see a person, you witnessed this person did something wrong, and it's a matter between man and God, and you saw him do something wrong. You know he did it wrong. You saw it. There's no question about it. There's no, maybe it's this way, maybe it's that way. He did something wrong. You know very clearly he's doing something wrong. Nonetheless, that doesn't give you permission to tell it over to people. Now, continuing from that, the ein chiluk bazeh beinam hu lav gomer doesn't make a difference if what you saw him commit was a prohibition, an absolute Torah prohibition, or a yaseh gemur daraisa, or a definite positive commandment that he disobeyed. Hamafursim, that's well known shu aser, that it's forbidden. If you go ahead and tell somebody about that, that will really, put him down. That'll really be degrading for him, because it's something that's a Torah prohibition or a Torah mitzvah, and everybody knows that you're not allowed to do it or that you have to do it. And if he doesn't do it, that Lashon Harah will really, be degrading him. But afilim hu davar she'ein nizar bezeh harbe amani Yisrael. But we're talking about something that a lot of people aren't careful about, unfortunately. And therefore, people don't look so down upon him. To talk about that someone who doesn't learn Torah. We know how important Torah study is, but there are a lot of people who don't study Torah like the way they should. And therefore, people just don't look down upon you for it as for other things that are, everybody knows not to do that. Or he told a untruth. He wasn't truthful. Okay. So to say that over, again, people don't necessarily look down at you for it. Now, when you're talking about saying over something, saying that somebody lied, And the Chavetz Chaim points out in the parentheses here, there are times you can tell people about it if there's a constructive reason for it. But here we're not talking about that. We're just talking about gossiping. We're just talking about telling over what people have done. And here again, he's saying that even for things that people don't get looked down upon for it so much, nonetheless, it's still forbidden. Nonetheless, you are speaking badly about him. You're speaking negatively about him. You are saying he doesn't fulfill the Torah. That is a negative statement that even if people don't look so down upon you, it's still not something that the person would want you talking about him like that. And even if we're not talking about a direct mitzvah, commandment, but rather what he calls a branch of a mitzvah. The Torah tells us, remember the Shabbos day. What does that mean? What's the basic interpretation? What's the basic commandment of remembering? Saying Kiddush. Now, there is something else that gets included in that, which is not as specific, which is not interpreted, that the mitzvah is not typically interpreted this way, I would say, and that is that according to the commentary of the Sefer Haredim, honoring Shabbos in a proper way, like with a proper meal, proper dress, is included in that mitzvah. Now, if you go saying about this person that this person is cheap, and therefore he doesn't honor Shabbos properly, you're speaking badly about him regarding the fact doesn't fulfill, but he's calling a branch of a mitzvah. Something that's not, so to speak, directly the mitzvah itself, in the sense of when you talk about this mitzvah, you don't refer to this about that mitzvah itself. And it's, perhaps we could say, it's not so much the obligation of the mitzvah as much as it's included that when you do this, it's fulfilled. Even that would be Lashon Harah. Or let's say it's but it's talking about a rabbinic enactment. The sages enacted not to do this initially. There are things that the sages prohibited. They created a prohibition, created an obligation. Then there are things that they said, this is something you shouldn't do. Shouldn't do it. It's not, initially, that's not the way to do things. But if you did it, it wouldn't be considered, even rabbinically, you've transgressed something. But nonetheless, this is something, even something as small as this, that you say over about someone, and even if you don't say it, even if you didn't do it in front of him, so you didn't embarrass him, and even if it's true, because you saw him do it, nonetheless, it is still forbidden. Have a wonderful day. Chodesh Tov, Chanukah Sameach, all the best.